Hello, welcome to my channel, Seed Infinity. In this video I wanted to kind of discuss and talk about just some of my own downloads and interpretation and what have you of the whole karmic reincarnation trap sort of loop, or energy harvesting or loosh, or that whole sort of vibe that they say that we can be governed and entrapped by in this earthly realm. There is kind of an idea that when you get to the other side or things like that, that other dimensions or what have you within this realm, that it can be kind of governed and orchestrated or run by an hierarchy of false light beings that pose and appear as the authority in charge, or or can even appear or try to insinuate that their knowledge or governance or what have you comes from God or source, when it's really not divine governance at all, and is their own little system they've used to entrap beings humans in order to do things harvest energy from them through things fear and suffering and all that sort of jazz. You can tie into the whole idea of as well of humans and other beings and stuff and what have you, being in these kind of 3D type realms and living on planets, and then the planet getting to a point where it dies as well, which is another form of harvesting energy, and then they're transported or whatever to another planet for then the whole cycle to continue again, almost a way of looking at we're the cattle being transported from farm to farm once all the grass gets eaten, and then they move to another farm, and then they they eat the cattle because they're farming the cattle, and once they've gone through all the grass on one paddock, they move them to another paddock, kind of once we go through all the resources on one planet, they move us to another planet, and they just keep harvesting from us through all our cycles of reincarnation and what have you. Because the whole idea of rather than feeding off us physically meat, instead feeding off our energy and those lower, denser energies that kind of trap us down in this 3D realm a lot more as well. And then it's just this continual vicious cycle, or feeding and breeding program. And the idea of they kind of entrap and keep us entrapped here by keeping us kind of oblivious to certain divine teachings and knowledge or what have you, and being connected sovereignly within ourselves to source and things like that. So instead taught through some kind of distorted Christian and religious teachings, or distorted spiritual or light-based teachings and things like that that seem close enough to be legit and resonant, but just have slight little changes and stuff to it that kind of keep us more closed-minded and entrapped, and especially with things of ideas sin and stuff like that, and karmic cycles and loops and things like that that kind of keep replaying out and out, especially with ideas and stuff when you think of, so often it's almost we're convinced to keep playing out all these karmic roles and karmic patterns and what have you in order to learn lessons and grow and stuff from them. But you kind of look back through history, and we've been doing this for thousands of years, and we haven't learnt those lessons yet or grown from it, and instead they kind of make it seem it's our fault and we're bad, so we adhere to those rules and programs, when it's clearly if it's taken thousands of years and we're still going through these karmic lessons or what have you, that the curriculum, so to speak, isn't working right. It's not the students' fault, it's kind of the school's fault, but it's kind of designed that way on purpose to keep us kind of coming back and thinking it's our idea to keep enrolling in these karmic loop and lessons that put us through so many situations of fear and suffering and all that sort of awful trauma type stuff that then creates this energy for them to feed off. So not only can they also pose as, light beings and, divinely, appointed by source or God or what have you on the other side and stuff, things like that when you pass over, but they can also, inhabit like human vessels or have human avatars or whatever you want to call it, in order to kind of, inflict and inhibit and, do things that sort of way as well, and to also like run around in their own little playground. And then also, the aspect of, using certain human vessels and avatars as like handlers, particularly against people that, certain humans, what have you, that they might have a lot of light or, divinity within them that they want to feed all that, trauma and fear energy off, and they might place certain like handler type people within certain vessels or avatars to kind of keep them even more so trapped and stuck in these loops and ways of thinking and such, and have, what have you. So, like they might play out certain ideas of, certain things happen to such extremities because, it's your fault from, maybe 3 lifetimes ago and you need to work out this punishment now, or it's something for your lineage you're working out, or there's all these rhymes and reasons. But often, like, the more you kind of look deeply into it, it's like the balance and divine justice aspect of it doesn't line up or balance out at all, and the scales can be quite severely tipped, especially for things as such as well, where often like victims of certain aspects of trauma or what have you are like convinced to keep reincarnating with the same offenders to allow them to learn their lessons and to grow, but really it's just continuing this same cycle, of trauma and all these negative energy outcomes to keep continuing on, and nothing's actually being really fundamentally learnt or grown from, at least not on the scale that it should be and in the way that it should be. There's clearly much better ways to go about it, and there already are many other ways of incorporating such systems of growth and karmic retribution or what have you that are different to the way that we do it here on earth. But so often they almost make out that this is the be-all, end-all, the only way, the only solution, it's God's way and all that, when that's just, not the case at all. And so often as well, the way we are in this 3D sort of realm, it's almost like we're actually are often like blocked and locked out, and especially from our lack of, knowledge and inner connection, not being taught and things like that, the true like divinity and connection to source and things like that are blocked out, and the more appropriate and divine ways of operating such systems and such are blocked and kept out, and we're kind of like locked in this like different system that this other group of beings or energy are kind of operating, and from that then stops also the other aspects being able to get through, so that we're even aware of them. And then so often as well, that can give people this sense of oh, maybe God isn't even real, or this doesn't seem to make sense, or there's no like fairness or equality in the way this is going. And then that can also like deviate a lot of people from true connection to true divinity, because they're like blindsided by this whole false light system that we've been like caught and encapsulated in, that kind of like tarnishes the whole idea of true God source divinity. And then so often as well, through many of these like reincarnation loops and karmic loops and stuff, we're put in with like similar or same players or different handlers or beings that are like feeding off the same like cycles of karma and trauma and stuff being repeated and repeated. And then also with each lifetime and stuff put through the veil of forgetfulness and stuff like that, so it's harder then to kind of piece the pieces together, or harder to kind of really see the pattern that has been going on, or to be able to click on or to remember knowledge you have learnt. So it's like keeps us dumbed and locked down and away from like our true sovereign self and being. and keeps us more in like a little sheeple, or, you know, like student, or like, you know, being like these dumb, unknowledgeable humans that have to like listen to these beings and listen to what they say, and, you know, do as they say, and believe them and trust them, and to, you know, step up and to get everything that they promise, or what have you, to be able to unlock to the next level, and all this, you know, yada yada yada. That is so often, like I said as well, can be so similar to true like teachings or true pathways, but then it's kind of twisted and turned slightly so it's resonant enough for people to latch onto it, but, you know, twisted and distorted enough that it actually kind of keeps us trapped and encapsulated in this kind of system and program they've got going on. You know, as I was saying as well, you know, it's not just unique to Earth right now, like it's something that, you know, once they destroy one planet, because they don't only just, you know, harvest the energy from the beings as well, from like humans and such like that, but also from, you know, the suffering of the planet itself, and then the planet itself, you know, may die or become inhabitable, and then they, you know, move to another planet. And as you know, and there certainly still are ways of, you know, ascending or what have you, and by, you know, going through these cycles and stuff, that you can still kind of, you know, have a few people kind of pop up and pop through and graduate, if you will, but there's definitely much more efficient and divinely kind of guided and orchestrated way of doing things that don't cause so much trauma and suffering, especially in such an unbalanced and unjust way that it currently does operate in this realm, where you have, you know, so often like so many more like innocent type, or not, you know, too malevolent type beings that are, you know, often really hoarded with so much karmic sludge and so much suffering. And then meanwhile you can see people that actually do so many awful and horrible things, and they're just, you know, getting away scot-free cycle after cycle, you know, not really having anything kind of play up or play into, you know, their life. And it's just this really unbalanced system, and so often they can kind of, you know, through the aspects of different lifetimes or their own lineages or what have you, and the idea of oneness, almost pass off their own karmic retribution onto other beings or other vessels in other lifetimes, that kind of keeps certain characters and vessels like free from any retribution for all their awful actions and what have you, which isn't, you know, a right or sovereign way to be doing things, you know. It's like they know the teachings and the truth so well that they're able to, you know, find the loopholes within it, so to speak. I guess kind of similar how to, you know, certain like, you know, dodgy but successful people are able to find loopholes within our current like legal system and things like that. It's kind of like a similar idea. They're able to find the loopholes and profit off that within, you know, the divine system as well, and kind of keep this system running for their own benefit, in ways that aren't really truly just and harmonious for everyone and to the benefit of everyone in a more divine way. And so I guess, you know, the general gist of this message isn't to, you know, spread fear or anything like that. I guess just to spread some of my own downloads and information for, you know, some clarity if you have, you know, heard some of these ideas and been a bit curious or whatever about it. And also just to remind, you know, of the importance of not always listening to or believing everything that's fed to you just because it comes from a supposed light being or because it comes from a supposed form of authority, and really building that sense of, you know, sovereign connection within yourself for what feels right and what resonates for you, and not being afraid to question things or to find a new way of doing things or to look at different paths or what have you. Because, you know, we all do come from source, so we all are equal beings in that way. You know, no one truly has an hierarchy over anyone in that sort of sense. So you can, you know, find what's right for you and try to follow what's right for you on this side in the earthly 3D realm, on the other side, like wherever you may be, like don't be afraid to, you know, stand for what you believe and to stand by that, and, you know, enact and manifest your reality from that, you know, no matter what the circumstance is. Because you also have your own divine connection to source as well, that you can, you know, trust and believe and feel empowered to, you know, say and stand for that. And even like the idea of, you know, beings like, say, like Jesus or Yeshua, you know, however you like to refer to him, you know, when he came and tried to, you know, kind of teach and get some of those ideas out and plant some seeds and such, and, you know, how he was, you know, really hounded and attacked by these sort of, you know, energetic forces that wanted to, you know, keep him quiet and shut him up. Or like, you know, the idea of Lucifer being a light bringer and a light bearer, you know, and, you know, coming down and then trying to, you know, spread some light on this situation, and instead, you know, the typical flip the script idea of, you know, making him seem like the bad evil guy, so that everyone kind of focuses on that and, you know, doesn't listen to him, you know, and like the distorted teachings of, you know, people like Jesus or what have you, that have, you know, kind of been some semblance kept the same, but also distorted in ways that kind of deviate from the true message, and, you know, things like sin and stuff like that added in, that, you know, kind of teach this idea of purity or needing to be perfect or needing to, you know, pay for your sin, or that, you know, that if anything bad happens to you, then, oh, you must have deserved it, or it must be from another lifetime, or all these ways that they kind of flip the script to make people just accept a lot of these terrible, awful things that can go on in the world as being their own fault, or as being something that just happens or is what it is. And, you know, like, I'll even quickly share from one of my own personal experiences, when I started going through one of my more bigger spiritual awakenings, I started to kind of realize and get the sense that, you know, two big main people in my life were actually more of like a handler type energy, just with certain circumstances going on and bizarre behavior. And I went through like a massive traumatic time with lots of awful, crazy things happening, and at the time as well, my third eye was also opening a lot, and it's like I could see their like avatars, or like their faces, you know, of their vessels and such, just like laughing and mocking as they were like feeding off my energy. And it was like such a weird, bizarre experience, but it definitely awakened me up to the validity and credibility of a lot of these sort of ideas and stories that you hear about, you know, the whole energy harvesting prison system, school system sort of thing that we can tend to be locked into here on Earth. You know, and that often, you know, another way of, you know, that throughout history they have kind of shut down these sort of realizations, discussions of these sort of topics, or, you know, the expansion of such ideas of, you know, making people seem crazy, or, you know, putting stories out in the media and stuff that people who talk about such things are crazy, like even how they used to do with UFOs and stuff, right? Like they'd put out like things to make people feel too worried to even talk about it, at the risk of looking insane or what have you, you know, which has been another ploy that they've been, you know, employing for God knows how long. And it was, you know, similar to back in the day before it was, you know, you're crazy for talking about UFOs or what have you, that, you know, like way back when, even in like, you know, little villages and horse and carts type time, there was, you know, the whole idea of like, oh, you know, you're a witch, or, you know, oh, they're the devil, or they're aligning with the devil because they're not going with what aligns with, you know, this typical, you know, God as a punisher of sin and all this sort of enactment and da-da-da, and you have to do this and have to do that, you know, and people that would try to, you know, speak out about certain ways or different ideas were often, you know, criticized or deemed as, you know, evil or crazy, or, you know, there's all these multitude of ways that they've kind of swept and swayed and confused and, you know, diluted the human consciousness in that aspect. you know, such another reason why now is just such an important and powerful time in humanity, because we are banding together a lot more, you know, remembering a lot more, awakening to a lot more, and just expanding our consciousness a lot more, that it's starting to become harder to be able to, you know, control us, to control the herd or control the cattle, or, you know, control their livestock, so to speak. That it is definitely this amazing and wondrous and, you know, expansive time that we are going through, that it's a great time to just really, you know, not get too caught up in, you know, the negative aspects or the fearful aspects of this sort of like stuff and information, but just to really, you know, connect to your own divinity and your own source connection, and to really kind of formulate and ground into what resonates for you of truth, rather than just blindly following, you know, the status quo, or blindly following what, you know, certain people might be saying or what you're being told, but to really, you know, think for yourself and feel for yourself what feels true and what feels right, and, you know, and connecting and sharing with others, as we all are, like, you know, doing so much so wondrously and amazing, that will really, you know, I feel like catapult humanity into just like a brand new wonderful future, where we actually are more sovereign beings in like a true sense, that we get to kind of, you know, control our own reality and manifest our own reality in our own accordance, rather than being manipulated by these outside forces and beings. Alright, well, I might leave that one there for now. You know, it's always you could talk for ages about these sort of topics, but don't wanna go on for too long. Alright, sending you so much peace, love, light, and blessings as always. Bye.